In this Holy Week, we have been on a journey that started with Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem and then went through the horror of Good Friday and then now to this space of Easter. And this is actually a Lutheran understanding of what the proclamation of the gospel is. Kind of always follows that path from death to new life. Sometimes we call it law and gospel. And so as I was trained as a preacher, right, you look for the law and the trouble in the text. Where are we struggling as people? How are we unfaithful to God? Where are death and the things of death in this world? And then we look for the grace, what God is up to in the story. As we come to this Easter story, though, it doesn't have that whole thing. It's just in the space of new life. The resurrection has already happened when the women get to the tomb. Whole of today's gospel is in that space of life. The death is no longer there. And so as we come to it with that understanding, right, to look for the things of death and how grace responds, all we have is the grace. But there is still something that we can learn from this story. To the tomb, the guards that have weapons and are standing there are so terrified by the angel that shows up that they're either playing dead or they're so in shock they are like they are dead. And then we don't understand what the women who didn't have any weapons and, right, who showed up to the same scary stuff, it doesn't tell us how they feel other than how the angel responds to them. And what is the first thing the angel says to them? Do not be afraid. So clearly, they probably looked afraid. And then the angel says, you came looking for Jesus, but already he is raised, he's not here. Go and tell the disciples. And then they go, and as they're running, it is with great joy and, it actually was in the other order, fear and great joy. I was trying to get you to fill in the fear part. So they go with fear and great joy because, right, this is scary stuff. And then they encounter Jesus, and he says to them, do not be afraid. So clearly, as we hear this story, what we understand is that first resurrection was scary, which means the new life that Jesus had was scary. So scary that twice they had to be told, do not be afraid. And as they went with fear and great joy. Now, journey through life, are new things sometimes scary? Yes, right? New life is scary. Now, not everything that is new is life-giving of the gospel. You can get a new job that is terrible. You can get into a new relationship that is awful, right? Not all new things are good. But what we hear in this story is that resurrection, new life, can be scary because it can be uncertain. It can come into the things that we don't know. It can challenge the things we understood to be true. It can take us to places that we did not want to go and make us uncomfortable in ways we did not want to be uncomfortable. I think about sometimes we can steer ourselves clear of those new things, right? Because we don't want to be challenged and changed. Sometimes we don't have a choice, though, right? A loved one dies or something happens, and we just have to go on that path. Sometimes we do have a choice, but then we end up making a different choice, end up someplace we didn't expect to be. This is what happened when I went to seminary. I was a little hazy on some of the details of expectations. They tell you have to do this thing called clinical pastoral education. And you understand sort of cognitively that means you have to go work at a hospital. Now, when I was in high school, I did some volunteer hours at a hospital in the transportation department where I drove people around. I was terrible at that. And I was uncomfortable in the hospital. Has anybody else ever been uncomfortable in a hospital place? Well, nurses, of course, right? But to know that I had to go into this space now and somehow try to be a pastoral chaplain presence. As you go through the process, you apply to a hospital. And in Columbus, Ohio, they said the hardest program is Children's Hospital for a number of reasons. One, the supervisor is the hardest, but two, it's a children's hospital. And my immediate thought was, no way I'm doing that. But I had a number of colleagues who said, it's the best one. Don't be afraid. So I went, and we were there for about 3 days doing training things. One of those trainings was a tour of the emergency room because as chaplains, if you were on call, you got called down to every level 1 and level 2 trauma. And they took us in and showed us where we would stand with the family as their child was being tended to. And the nurse looked at us and said, "Do you have kids?" "Yep." She said, "You will see kids here that remind you, and you're going to get broke up about it, and I can't be cleaning you up in here while we're trying to take care of somebody else. So if that happens, you just leave." Well, I didn't think it was going to be that bad. Until the first trauma. A little kid run out. Grandpa didn't see him. He had drove over his foot a little bit with the riding mower and taken a little part of his heel off. And I'm standing there, and the danged if he didn't look a lot like my younger son. So I didn't leave, but I was working hard to hold it together. This was not easy stuff. I once had somebody that was a seminary student say, "Where did you learn how to pray out loud?" Spoiler alert, there is no class, right? You go into the hospital, you walk into a room and say, "Would prayer be helpful?" And then they say, "Yes." And now you have to pray. It's terrifying. Like sometimes I ask you all to pray and you go, I don't want to pray out loud in front of these people. Try praying out loud with a kid who's in the ICU and their family. Are there good words for that? There are not. So as time went on, deal with deaths and various things, and the first day that I actually had a death on my floor, still lots of stuff I forget, but I will not forget the busy hall that I walked back and forth. There was no one in that hall that day, and I was walking down that hall scared to death as to what I was going to do when I walked into that room. And the first thing I said, I prayed a lot. First thing I said was I introduced myself. And Dad shouted at me, "You can bring my daughter back." I walked right into that one, right? Because I didn't know what I was doing, and I was scared. But God carried us through it. All of this is to say, those 10 weeks were a tremendous experience of growth for me. And the whole time, it was scary. As the women come to the tomb, new life is there, but that new life is scary. Can take from this on Easter is that not everything that's new is good, but when new life comes to us, it's probably going to be hard. It's probably going to stir some stuff up in us, and it's probably going to be scary. But Jesus says, do not be afraid, because he is already there. He is already ahead of them to Galilee, and he is already ahead of us to the new life that we are getting drugged to, kicking and screaming if need be. Because the Jesus that died on the cross and was raised to new life did that for each and every one of us, and will continue to call us to those new places, whether we're quite ready or not, whether we're afraid or not, Jesus carries us along with grace. Amen.